Kalispera και από μένα. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, General Consul, for that wonderful introduction, aside from the last part. Thank you very much to the organizers and Katerina for the invitation for me to be here and have this honor of kicking off this very important conference on 1821. I must tell you, I feel very much at home here in Sacramento. I spent 6 months in 1994 at the Vrionis Center out in Rancho Cordova. Spiros Vrionis is my mentor, my teacher, my friend, and has, in a sense, shaped my career. And in a wonderful coincidence, Katerina was a student of Professor Vrionis and myself at NYU, so I feel this wonderful sense of pride in her achievements and a reassurance that modern Greek studies are in good hands. And from what we hear, I'm really impressed with what my colleagues here are doing on the West Coast. In a sense, the West Coast is becoming a hub for modern Greek studies, and that's extremely important. And I think we all want to help develop the programs here as much as we can. This moment of the time this conference is taking place, which is at the end of a year which has seen so many events that commemorate 1821, is an opportune one because it gives us the opportunity to reflect not only on 1821, but also to think about the way, what we've learned from the commemorations that have taken place over the past few months. And if I was to summarize what the one thing that I think has come out of the commemorations, that is the international, the global dimension of 1821. So if we go to the next slide, there were a number of articles, conferences, books, events, and they seem to be a consensus, which is a wonderful thing because there's not always a consensus in Greece, quite the opposite, if I may say so. And there really was a sense that the Greek Revolution of 1821 was something that was influenced by international events, and in turn it shaped and inspired international events, not only through the Philhellenism that we knew, but through many other ways. And you see on the screen that on the right and the left there are two recent publications by eminent scholars who are pointing out to the global significance, the international significance of the Greek Revolution. And hopefully now, with this work being done, we may be able to see 1821 and Greece enter the curriculum of European studies. It's been ignored, it's been on the margins. We make cameo appearances in the history of modern Europe when it's taught in the big Western countries. And now I think we've made a very solid case that you cannot understand 19th century European history without looking at and studying the Greek Revolution and what it meant, because it was a pioneering event in the history of Europe. What does the revolution mean for us Greek Americans? If we go to the next slide, you see here on the left the the Museum of Philhellenism, which opened its doors in May in Athens, and it's difficult to get to. It's in the suburb of Nea Philothei. It's on the road up to northern suburbs to Kifisia. On the right is a exhibition currently going on at the Yanadios Library, and there's also a recent book by our colleague Maureen Santelli on American Philhellenism, and she links the American Philhellenic movement with the movement of the abolition of slavery, because many of, especially women who got involved in solidarity with Greece in the 1820s, went on in the decades that followed to become active in the abolitionist movement. So for us, and as Greek Americans, as Greeks, as Americans of Greek descent, these developments have helped us understand the connection. Those connections were always made. Hellenism equals Americanism, etc. And many times I felt, okay, I understand the general idea, but what does it really mean? Well, this is what it means. America reacted enthusiastically to Greece because it saw parallels between 1821 and 1776, and that is of a huge importance for us, and dare I say it's of huge importance for Greece, because if Greece recognizes, and as it's seeing through the exhibits which are on display in Athens, the Greek people can understand the support and the solidarity it got from Americans. The relationship between the two countries has not always been as positive, but the fact that they supported 1821 is of huge critical importance. Moving on to the next slide, Katerina. What about Greek America now specifically in 1821? Well, I think you knew about the Greek parades that take place. Greek America has commemorated 1821 through the parades that take place on or around March 25th. The presence of the F zones, which is something that has been taking place over the past 2 or 3 decades, gives special importance to those parades. The most important parade is that of Fifth Avenue, of course, in New York, but there are parades in other cities as well. The photographs on the left are from the parade in my where I've been living over the past 25 years, Philadelphia. It's got a big parade there. And on the right, you will see the program of the Greek Independence Day parade in New York City in Sunday, March 30th of 2003. And I thought you'd be interested to see that one of the Grand Marshals that year of the parade is Angelo Tsakopoulos. The parade creates a sense of community. The marshals, through the through the invitation of people to become marshals, as people like Angelo Tsakopoulos, the community honor its prominent members, but the parade itself creates a great sense of community. And that's one way in which 1821 helps Greek America come together, in a sense. The parades, and going on to the next slide, the first official parade took place in New York City in 1938, and it becomes an annual event. Originally, the parade did not take place along Fifth Avenue. Those of you who know about the current route of the parade, it's from 59th Street, from the Plaza Hotel, up to almost the Metropolitan Museum along Fifth Avenue on the side of Central Park. But originally, the parade started on Park Avenue and then turned down onto the side street, 74th Street, and ended at the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Cathedral, underlining, in a sense, the significance of both religion and the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in the celebration of March the 5th. And there was a service, the parade ended with a service at the cathedral. And here are some of the clippings of the New York Times. In the 1930s, 1940s, it was such a big new event for New York City that it got extensive coverage in the New York Times, and there were mentions of the roles of Archbishop Athinagoras and later on of Archbishop Michael, who replaced him in the 1950s. Going on to the next slide, aside from the parade, there was also a thematization. There were things that people associated with 1821. And in the 1920s, when the centenary came around in 1921, as most of you know, in 1921 there were muted celebrations in Greece because the Asia Minor campaign was going on, so it was felt inappropriate to have too many celebrations because the Greek army was fighting in the depths of Asia Minor at the time. What happened in the United States was that the two Greek-language newspapers, Atlandida and Ethnikos Kyrix, along with the church, the Archdiocese was actually formed in 1922, but the Archbishop was already here, Alexander Kitroeff. The three got together and decided that they would engage in a campaign to raise funds for the Greek orphans. What had happened, of course, in Asia Minor was that the ethnic Greeks in Asia Minor were facing difficulties and ethnic cleansing from 1914 onwards, so there were very many orphans, and therefore there was a need to help the orphans build orphanages in Greece, and that becomes a theme. All the celebrations of the 25th of March in the 1920s and the 1930s stressed the need to gather funds to help the Greek orphans. And the issue of Greek orphans remains a strand in Greek American history from the 1920s onwards. What the picture shows here is, I think you can read what it says. It's the orphans under the care of the American Near East Relief, exercising at the ruins of the Temple of Jupiter of Athens, Zeus, and of course the background in the Acropolis. The Near East Foundation, of course, was the major American philanthropic organization that was helping Greece and was helping the resettlement of refugees and helping the orphans especially. So that was the theme of the 1821 celebrations. Parades towards the end of the 1930s, funds for the orphans in the 1920s and the 1930s. Each Greek-American organization had its own priorities at the time, and we should not forget, although we are focusing here on the Archdiocese, AHEPA, which was the second most important institution of Greek America. AHEPA at the time was focusing on the American Philhellenes, because of course AHEPA, seeing itself as an American organization, wanted to stress the Americanness of its members and wanted to establish links between America and Greece, and therefore America stressed the role of American Philhellenes, and I've got a typo here, of course. This photograph is it's the establishment of a plaque in honor of Samuel Gridley Howe, the Bostonian, who's a physician who went to Greece, fought as well as operated as a physician, maybe the best known Philhellene, and this is a HEPA's convention in 1939 in Rhode Island, and they establish a statue on the campus of Brown University. Greece has just recently issued a stamp in honor of Samuel Gridley Howe. Going back to the Archdiocese, of course, the 1940s bring World War II, and then celebrating 1821 becomes a way of instilling pride in Greece and making a connection between Greece's entry into World War II and its heroic fight against the invading Italians, which resulted, of course, in them being pushed back. So the 1940s celebrations of the 25th of March, again with the church in New York playing a very important role. Here, the mention of Archbishop Athinagoras here in 1941, and the theme becomes a celebration of freedom and democracy, linking 1821 to the 1940s and Greece's involvement in World War II. Going on to the next slide, the political connection with 1821 continues for Greek America in the 1950s. This is the time of the Greek Civil War, and therefore the Fifth Avenue Parade talks about freedom and democracy and freedom. Again, the themes of the 1940s are continued in the 1950s. The photograph here from the New York Times is the then mayor of New York participating in the parade, and this becomes another permanent feature. The parade, organized by the Federation of Greek Societies and the Archdiocese, features important, prominent American politicians, including the mayor of New York. Again, the parade has moved. It's on its familiar route on Fifth Avenue, but again, it ends at the Greek Orthodox Cathedral of Holy Trinity, where a service takes place at the end of the parade. Again, a linking of the idea of a free Greece with the Greek Orthodox religion and the Archdiocese. Moving on to from the 1940s to the 1950s, and this is a photograph of Archbishop Michael, who replaced, as I think you all know, Archbishop Athinagoras became ecumenical patriarch, and in 1949, 1950, to be precise, Michael becomes Archbishop. And there again we have a combination of an emphasis both on the politics. This is the time when there's a big controversy in Greece over the children and the fate of children during the Greek Civil War. That becomes a very important issue which comes up on the March 25th celebrations. And then this is from the New York Times. The text here you see on the right. There is in 1949 there is a 7-day celebration with parades in 300 American towns. It's in the 1950s onwards that the parade becomes an American phenomenon. And what Michael does, Archbishop Michael, compared to Athinagoras, was a cleric who was a statesman. He establishes the prominence of the church in many ways. Compared to Athinagoras, Michael is a theologian. He's more of an intellectual. Some people complain that he's sending them that his epistles and his announcements are too long, with too many quotes, etc., difficult to read. He's cerebral, he's low-key, he's a thoughtful cleric. And he starts to introduce faith more explicitly into the celebrations. He talks about faith being, he reminds people of faith being at the core of the victorious uprising that resulted in an against the odds victory, rebirth of the nation in the Kolibithra, the baptismal font. And again, because this is the 1950s where there is a great deal of assimilation, the 1950s, the eminent historian Theodore Saloutos talks about the 1950s as being the era of Greek American respectability, because Greek America now becomes an integral part of American society. And Michael, conscious of that, also talks about the Greeks continuing their religious racial course in America with faith of our ancestors, and talks about loving America and Greece and working towards creating an ideal of Greek American Christian civilization. So now with Michael in the 1950s, the commemoration and the celebration of 1821 becomes not only something about freedom, not only something about faith, but something also that should make the Greeks feel closer to America. And now we come to what I think we should all agree with the next slide. Yes, we should all agree is that one of the most important figures in Greek America. In fact, with all due respect to Athinagoras, I would suggest that Archbishop Iakovos is the most central, most important figure in the history of Greek America in the 20th century. And Archbishop Iakovos is going to initiate an even more expansive program of celebrations of 1821. He's building on what Michael did, but this is Iakovos. It's going to be bigger than life, broader, bigger, stronger. And he's going to expand in two ways. He's going to introduce even more themes in the celebration of 1821, making 1821 central to Greek American identity. And then he's also, because this is Iakovos, he's going to plan things, he's going to direct things, he's going to tell people what to do, which is what Iakovos was good at doing, and it benefited people most of the time. And he brings in an emphasis on the schools. Iakovos is big on instilling a sense of the significance of 1821 in the schools, and he's instructing the education department to form special programs so that the school kids can have their own celebration of 1821. And going on to the next slide, and this is difficult to read, but this brings us to the celebrations of the 150th anniversary of the Greek Revolution that takes place in 1971. Unfortunately, Greece is under a military dictatorship in 1971, and the celebrations that took place in Greece have been charitably described as a caricature. There were at the Panathinaik Stadium down in Athens, there were reenactments, poorly designed reenactments, and there wasn't much content and depth to the celebrations. Interestingly enough, Archbishop Iakovos, who at the time had an ambivalent relationship to the government, to the dictatorship in Athens, but nonetheless, Iakovos designed a very, very detailed and important celebration that takes place on the 150th anniversary, and there is very little mention of the regime in Athens. Iakovos is going to hold his own Greek-American celebration, and he sends this, the sheet in yellow is the instructions of exactly how the celebration should take place, and he's got a hierarchy. He's saying that the celebrations should stress 4 things. First, the role of the Church. The role of the Church. Second, the consciousness of the nation, the idea of Greek consciousness being born in 1821. Third, the heroism of all those people who fought against the odds. And fourth, the self-sacrifice of the Philhellenes, η αυταπάρνηση των Φιλελλήνων, as he calls them. So Iakovos, in a sense, is going into Ahepa territory. Ahepa is continuing to talk about the Philhellenes, and now Iakovos is telling the Greek Orthodox in America that we've got religion, we've got national consciousness, we've got heroism, we've got the Philhellenes. Those are the 4 things you should focus on. And the celebrations are extensive in 1971. We go on to the next slide, and this is just a kind of collage of the very many activities that took place. My favorite is the one on the right, which is clearly something that the school has produced with the mimeographs. Those of you who are, those of us who are over 50, whatever, know what a mimeograph is. It shows you the grassroots celebration that took place in the church thanks to Archbishop Iakovos' initiative. Going on to the next slide, and this is Iakovos. Every 25th of March, Iakovos sends out a letter, 3 letters to the parishes. Sometimes the letter is supposed to be read from the pulpit, and he talks about these are from the 1980s. The one on the left is 1986, and there Iakovos makes this very strong connection between 1821 and 1776. Michael had made it somewhat more carefully and cerebrally, maybe, the way Archbishop Michael operated. Iakovos is just coming out quite explicitly. I'll just read the last sentence of the one on the left. It is for this cause and with such heroic faith that the freedom fighters in America fell in battle to gain independence in 1776, and the stalwart figures for Greek independence sacrificed their very lives in the revolution of 1821, a linking of 1776 and 1821. And this is Iakovos continuing this expansive thematization of 1821 and guiding the February 12, 1988. He's actually telling people you should take part in the parade, and in fact you should pay for the floats yourself, which again is. If the people who complained at the time were that the parishes had to do too much, but we paternally exhort you to participate in the parade with the students of the various schools and members of all parish and community organizations of society, and also help the Federation with your financial assistance so that the costs of the various floats that will be included will be covered. By you, he doesn't say that, but he means that. Again, Iakovos engaged, active, taking 1821 as a central element, commemoration of 1821 as a central element in Greek American life. And in conclusion, I think the archbishops that follow Iakovos, in a sense, continue the Iakovian legacy. Archbishop Spiridon, Archbishop Dimitrios, and of course Archbishop Elpidophoros has not had the opportunity because of COVID to participate in a 25th of March parade, but hopefully that will happen in 2022. On the photograph on the left here, you see confirmation of the significance of both the church and the 1821. The cleric on the left is the former Metropolitan of New Jersey. There's U.S. New York Senator Schumer enthusiastically waving a flag, Archbishop Dimitrios, Thessaloniki businessman Savidis, who owns the wrong soccer team, and Mayor de Blasio, former Mayor de Blasio of New York, and on the right is the Mr. Galatoulas, who was then president of the Federation. What is that Iokovian legacy, finally? And I suggest it's understanding 1821 as a major event with multiple meanings, those meanings that Iakovos set out and his successors have continued to proclaim. Religion, freedom, nationalism, parallels of 1776. And given that this event is so important and has been understood as such an event with major significance for Greece and also for America, I think I suggest, if I can end with a suggestion and exhortation, and what I take from our celebrations of 1821 is, up to now, Greek America has spoken about the connection of Greece and America through the fact that the founding fathers were influenced by ancient Greece. And that, of course, we know and is a very valid connection between Greece and America. But clearly, very clearly now, we can understand that 1821 is also something that we can not only feel very proud of, but something that connects us to America and brings Greek Americans closer to America and America closer to Greece. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah.
Okay. We have a few minutes before Orestes Koletsos and his ensemble perform. Do we have any questions for Dr. Kitroeff? Any questions or any comments? You're all fighting to put your hands up.
There's
yes.
What kind of financial support came from the United States for the revolutionary era, for the 10 years that the struggle was on? So there were a number of ways that America helped. The financial support was less through arms. There were 2 frigates that were sent, and there were 11 shiploads of supply, 11 ships that were chartered by Philhellenic committees in Boston, Philadelphia, and New York that were sent over to Greece around 1827, 1828, towards the end of the revolution, to go to the suffering citizens. At the time, the United States did want to support Greece more actively, and the irony is that was the time when the Monroe Doctrine was proclaimed, which meant that America didn't want to get involved in European affairs because it worried that the Europeans would get involved in Latin American affairs and then maybe go northwards as well. So the irony is that the person who proclaimed that doctrine, President James Monroe, was educated, spoke Greek and Latin at school, and was a Philhellene and was rooting for the Greeks. But because of the geopolitical interests of the U.S., he couldn't actually send arms. But America was theoretically neutral. But America's neutral, and it sends volunteers over to fight. It sends 11 shiploads. It sends 2 frigates. That's not quite a neutrality, and an important way America helped Greece.
Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were definitely at odds over the question of states' rights versus federal rights. Did the modern Greek state deal with that and resolve it?
Yes, so what happened was Thomas Jefferson, when he was America's representative in Paris, had met the Greek scholar Adamantios Koreis, and they continued their correspondence. And Thomas Jefferson was recommending that Greece follow the system that he wanted America to follow. So not states' rights, but federal. And in fact, there was disappointment in America when eventually, as we know, after the end of the revolution, the European powers brought over the Bavarian prince Otto to become a king. There was disappointment among the Philhellenes because the Philhellenes thought that, quite clearly the Americans didn't think that a king was a good idea. And the fact that they saw 1821 as 1776, they felt that the Greeks deserved more of a democracy of their own rather than a monarchy.
We have questions over here and over here. Both sides of the bench.
As a retired admiral, medical officer of the Greek Navy, I would like to add that Samuel Kitroeff was the first Surgeon General of the Greek Navy, and he served, valiantly in this position, and it was not a decorated role, that he played for many years. And later on, he helped very much the revolution of the Cretans, later on. So we have to remember. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. He comes back to Greece in 1866 to help the Cretan uprising with his wife, Julia Ward Howe.
My name is Constantine Georges. I'm not a historian or political scientist. I'm a public health man. And take advantage of the questions and the statements by the Admiral and also the question about the Monroe principle, etc., etc. I'd like to share with you something I read a few days ago. A lot of events took place on the occasion of the 200 years in Greece. But an event which
Thank you, thank you. Yes, Haiti is the first country to recognize the Greek insurgents.
And we have time for one more question. Who had a hand up over here? Who was our last? There we go.
Based upon your wonderful history of Greece, you didn't mention anything about Cyprus. Do you see a unification of the issue in Cyprus?
Yes, when the 1821 revolution broke out, there were uprisings in several other parts of the Greek world, and one of the most significant took place in Cyprus, and the bishops of the Greek Orthodox Church in Cyprus I believe the three were decapitated by the Ottoman authorities, so that in a way to try and stop the Greek uprising that was taking place in Cyprus. That shows us two things. First of all, that the Greek Orthodox in Cyprus saw themselves very much as part of a Greek world that included Peloponnesos, Sterea Elada, and the islands. And it also shows us, of course, that the Turks themselves considered the Cypriots as part of the Greek world and took the brutal measures because they were worried that the uprising in Cyprus would have spread and maybe overthrown Ottoman rule. So 1821 is the first of many other examples we have in the subsequent decades of the fact that Greece and Cyprus are really part of one Hellenic entity.